Hey, thank you to the track chair for that awesome introduction. My name is Joshua Ness from Verizon 5G Labs in New York City. Super happy to be here talking about 5G and edge computing and how they're going to facilitate advanced content creation and next generation experiences in the world of augmented reality and probably some virtual reality thrown in there as well. One of the cool things about the work that I do here in New York with 5G Labs is predicting the future about where 5G is going to take some of those supporting technologies and some of the stuff that we know about right now, like augmented reality, like mixed reality, and how it's going to change how we both create content, how we deliver that content, and then I think most importantly, how we end up consuming that content as individuals and as groups. And that's more so prevalent right now when we're starting to think about how mixed reality experiences can facilitate off-site training and virtual job functions and things like that. And so really happy to be talking about this subject here today. As we're talking about 5G, it's helpful to talk about where we came before this. It's to get a baseline of where we're coming from, right? And so we started off with 1G, of course. That was just that brick phone that you see right there, the Zach Morris phone, where you could basically call, and that's it. It still operated on circuits, right? Same thing with 2G. It did start to introduce some digital functionality, but it was still very much circuit based. With 2G, you could text message, and that's pretty much it. There wasn't a whole lot of data functionality that was there until you get into 3G, and that's where you start getting into the BlackBerries of the world and other smartphone manufacturers like Palm start creating new types of devices that are taking advantage of the connectivity's capabilities of transmitting data, right? Now, once you start thinking about 3G and then into 4G, which is where most of our recent memory is contained, then you start thinking about how the world really began changing, right? And it didn't happen by accident, but it did happen with the equilibrium and the rise and the prevalence of hardware and connectivity both meeting together at the same place. Now, before that actually happened, when we were still in that 3G world, hardware took a big leap. Right, and it was in Cupertino, California, in 2007. And Steve Jobs stood up and he said, "One more thing." And he unveiled the iPhone for the very first time, right? And it was something that was brand new. It was a revolution in user interface technology, right? And the iPhone itself was really cool. It had this virtual user interface, and it had this full web browser experience, and it could also download large files from the internet. Now, these were two things: that full web browser and the ability to manipulate large files. No phone had been able to really do that before. BlackBerries were mostly for calendaring and emailing up to that point, and Palms themselves were even a step below that. You still had to dock that thing next to a computer in order to swap information back and forth, right? To sync that data. So with the iPhone, all of a sudden people had in their pockets this virtual supercomputer, right? Because it had a big giant processor in there that it used to facilitate the manipulation of those large data files, as well as that web browser experience, and therefore also that large battery that you see right there. And that's kind of where we've been for the past, 13 years. The device itself, yeah, it's gotten more powerful. It's gotten faster processors. It's gotten better cameras. The first iPhone didn't even have a camera, did it? Well, maybe it did. But by and large, it is the same device, right? We were able to start using cloud to manipulate things and store data, and where we have those experiences, but mostly it's still the same. Now, Apple opened up their developer ecosystem a year or so after that, and they said, hey, if you want to create applications for the iPhone platform, go ahead. That would be great. And so they did, and that's where you really start seeing this growth in third-party applications that take advantage of that hardware platform, right? But 3 years after the release of the iPhone, we still didn't have a lot of the same apps with the same kinds of functionalities we see today. They were still hampered by the fact that they were on a 3G network. There was still that the low throughput that really allowed them to create such amazing applications as words with friends. Now, when you think back in 2010, the question is like, what is the most innovative app that you have on your phone? And this was pretty much it. You had the ability to play Scrabble with somebody who lived in Greece or in Georgia, right? And that was the extent of an application's capabilities in 2010, and as far as kind of consumers go, right? And so after 2010, you start seeing the advent of 4G, where streaming video was that killer app, they used to call it. But what it really allowed for was pioneers with new young companies, people like Mark Zuckerberg or Reed Hastings or Jeff Bezos, to start thinking about how do we start creating new experiences for our consumers when they have a very powerful device in their pocket, as well as the ability with connectivity to be to maintain a consistent connection with them, and also to stream them video and other similar experiences. And so that gave us the rise of applications and services that we had never even seen before that and couldn't even imagine. Now we're to the point where we have sometimes entire economies that are built on the back of 4G. When you think about the gig economy, you're really talking about people who are able to do a lot of their work and manage their work from their phone, right? And so the fact that so many people rely on a 4G connection, even to make their living, is really a testament to what can happen when device technology meets connectivity advancements and allows for new types of services, right? And so it begs the question of like, how are we using 4G today? Well, we're using it for pretty much everything. A lot of us live our lives on these devices, especially if this image looks at all familiar to you, of young people constantly on their phones, texting, getting information, listening to music, watching videos. And we've kind of started to max out some of the capacity that we get from these devices, because it still serves as a hub, right? The device itself has that processor, and it's able to crunch that data so much so that when you have peripherals, things that are like hearables or other wearables, usually it's watches and things like that. Sometimes watches can be connected into the network, but for the most part, all these peripherals, especially when you start talking about VR and AR equipment, those are connected into that hub device, right? They're connected into the device that has the processor and has the modem, right? And with 4G, you're talking about average speeds of about 30 to 40 megabits a second, which is not bad, right? You can watch a video on that. You can refresh your Instagram with that. You can do a whole lot of things. However, you still need all of that computing power on the device in order to be able to process those experiences. And we've achieved next generation experiences, things like augmented reality on these devices. Think about Snapchat. You think about Instagram, but those aren't streaming. Those are all pre-downloaded packets that are able to be activated if that particular feature is turned on within those applications. And so we're not even to the point now where we can stream even low quality consumer grade augmented reality applications and services. So that gets us to where we're going with 5G. And we know that 5G is coming, and in a lot of places it's already here. Between all of the carriers, 5G is in dozens of cities with a variety of spectrum allocations and allotments, and that's for another conversation. But 5G is here, right? And it is starting to bring some of these new types of experiences and these new capabilities. And it's my opinion that hardware is going to catch up to that and start forcing us to rethink about how we consider the devices that we use and the experiences that we expect from them. So here's just a quick slide that talks about some of the benefits that you're going to see with 5G over 4G. It goes into things like ultra low latency, faster peak data rates, and on that bottom bar right there, you can see a lot of the qualities that make that possible. Things like an all fiber network, things like millimeter wave spectrum that facilitates massive data transfer speeds. We're talking like 2 gigabits a second, whereas 4G averages at 30 30 to 40 megabits a second. In cities, you might see maybe 100 megabits a second. With 5G, even now in its infancy, we're seeing upwards of 2 gigabits a second with millimeter wave spectrum technology. And then on the right there, you see multi-access edge computing. So people call it mobile edge computing. And that's really going to be what drives the adoption of new types of hardware and new experiences with the use of 5G. They really do go together. So now we've done some thinking about how 5G is going to shape the landscape, right? And so we talked about some of those things that you saw before about high throughput, low latency. We know that's going to impact gaming. We know it's going to impact things like IoT, as well as stadium experiences. Whenever we can finally come together as large groups of people again, there's going to be a lot of different ways that AR and other types of supporting technologies are going to use 5G to deliver new kinds of experiences. And it's going to lead us into what we're calling that fourth industrial revolution. It's not just the carriers that are calling it that. It's actually a term that came out of the World Economic Forum, places like Davos. They really do believe, and a lot of the experts do believe, that the introduction of advanced connectivity will lead to this real-time intelligent ecosystem starting pretty much now, right? And in order for us to get there, we have to start thinking critically about what these devices actually look like. Now, I bring up this slide not only because I am a Star Trek nerd, but this is a great example of how we think about the impact of new technology in the moment, right? You can see here, and this is from the 1960s, and Captain Kirk, what he's got there, he's got a tablet. He's got a tablet before anyone had even considered what a tablet actually is, some sort of a wireless device. Well, what is he doing? He's writing on it almost like it's an Etch-a-Sketch that he can write on. You can see there's some knobs coming out of it. And look at his chair right there. He's got like raised light bulbs and other types of sensors and inputs and things like that, because that's where our minds went in 1960. Was, let's take everything we know now with machines that require dials and switches and buttons, and let's just make it wireless, and cool, that'll be the future. But we don't actually consider what advancements are going to bring or what other types of supporting technologies are going to be there. And so what we're going to find, I think, is as we're thinking right now about how we both create mixed reality content and consume mixed reality content, we need to start thinking a little more, dare I say, spatially, about how those experiences are going to be facilitated. So we get to the impact of 5G, right? And we talked about high bandwidth, talked about low latency, and then getting into even more complicated but beneficial things like network slicing or location specificity about how these are going to be able to facilitate a whole variety of experiences for a whole variety of people. And so we start thinking about the disruptive economics and how it's going to change things, how we're going to apply it across different areas inside and even across verticals, getting into AI with edge computing, as well as immersive productivity, right? And that gets into more of this XR stuff that we're talking about. So one of the things that we need to consider is what is edge computing in the first place, and it's that middle tile right there where it talks about AI edge, and honestly, all of these are going to have some form of edge compute associated with them. Now you think about cloud, and we talked about this previously about how a lot of the experiences that you're seeing on your device, they're not actually on the device itself. Like when you open up Instagram, those photos aren't on your device. You're calling them from a server somewhere else, right? And so the idea is that we can take those servers and that cloud experience, and we can move it very close to the end user, very close to the client device. And this is just a proxy for what client devices will look like in the future, and we'll talk about that in a second. But you can move that computing capability close to the user, and in doing so, greatly expand the computing capabilities, the GPU capabilities, and using 5G, almost instantly move that information back and forth between the computing center and the display center, right? Where the experience is actually happening. And so with 5G, with 5G, you can start seeing some of that latency be so low that it's mimicking an on-device experience. And so that's going to unlock a whole bunch of new use cases, things like gaming, things like new generation content. You see on the right there a lot of business uses. And so now we start thinking about, what does that mean for content creation and consumption? Well, we know that content creation began with things like, we know when we think about it, we think about data centers and animators and things like that, hours and days. But we're starting to think about, how can we start replicating this stuff in 3D and in immersive capacities, right? Volumetric capture, motion capture, things like this to create content that people can begin consuming in interesting ways. And here you have three examples of how to use a device with a life-size Michael Jordan, the greatest basketball player who ever lived, as well as things like stepping into a portal experience, right? And even something more interesting that incorporates the world around you, such as landing something on the moon right there. Now, these are experiences that are meant to be consumed on these particular devices, but usually they have to be downloaded onto the device itself. And with 5G, you can actually stream these directly to that device. Now, what does that mean for what these devices are actually going to look like, right? What you see here is an example of a volumetric capture studio that we have in my lab, in the 5G lab in New York City. And what we do, we use this to create new types of content that can be displayed and actually experienced on a new type of device or new types of devices. And we don't, some of these devices we know. And as we're getting close to the end here, I want us to start thinking about how 5G and Edge and that new creation of content can lead to the new consumption of content. And we've all seen pictures like this where someone's using an AR headset and they're able to have a variety of experiences in front of them. Now, I think that's actually going to lead to this ecosystem of connected devices. And I think 5G and edge computing are going to facilitate that. And I want to leave you with this thought here. This is an image here of a vehicle that's using LiDAR and radar to detect all these different things around it. But I don't think this is actually going to be how autonomous driving, and dare I say the rest of us, start living our lives. I think it's going to be using 5G and NEC for this interconnected ecosystem of data that's being pulled in from a wide variety of sources and allowing us to synthesize all types of information coming from a wide variety of sources and to facilitate better decision making, both for us as individuals as well as for businesses. And so when we start thinking about how 5G and edge computing are going to change the way we think about XR content creation and consumption, I want us to think about it like this: a spatial virtual ecosystem that delivers new types of functionality and new types of experiences that allow for new types of content and new types of information, all to come together and to interact with devices like glasses or hearables or other types of technology that can all connect into the network and deliver this ecosystem approach to information delivery and consumption. So thank you so much for listening. Super excited to be here and talk with you today. Thank you again to Augmented World Expo for having me, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Hey, and welcome back. Hope you enjoyed that incredibly well done presentation. It's kind of interesting there, doing the lead-in and the follow-up to my own talk. I was there in the live chat there. If you can see to the right, I was answering some questions about how we're thinking about 5G and its deployment, and hopefully you got some really great ideas about how 5G is going to be used with next generation augmented and virtual reality experiences. So if you have additional questions, please do feel free to throw them in that chat room right there. I'll happy to answer those here throughout the rest of the day.